The alarm on my phone, a tinny, insistent buzz, dragged me from the shallow depths of sleep at precisely 11:30 p.m. Another day, or rather, another night, was beginning. My apartment, a cramped two-bedroom box on the third floor of a building that had seen better decades, was cold, even in the summer. The landlord always promised to fix the drafty windows, but promises, like most things in my life, seemed to evaporate into the thin air. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cheap mattress groaning in protest, and felt the familiar ache in my lower back. Years of hunched driving, of clutching the steering wheel in the dead of night, had turned my spine into a roadmap of chronic discomfort. A quick glance at the stack of bills on the chipped kitchen counter, electricity, rent, the ever-present car maintenance, confirmed the necessity of another long shift. My routine was a monotonous cycle: wake, brew instant coffee black as tar, pull on the same faded jeans and worn jacket, grab my phone, and head out into the city's indifferent embrace. Each night was a desperate scramble for fares, a silent prayer that the app wouldn't glitch, that I wouldn't hit traffic, that I wouldn't end up in some dead-end street with no signal. Every dollar earned was already mentally allocated, a tiny bandage on the gaping wound of my financial worries. My old sedan, a beige relic with more miles than sense, sat hunched at the curb, its paint dulled by countless suns and rains. The driver's seat, molded to my weary frame over years, offered little comfort, but it was my office, my sanctuary, and my cage. I slid in, the familiar scent of stale coffee and faint air freshener filling my nostrils. The engine coughed to life with a reluctant grumble, a sound that always made my heart clench with anxiety. One breakdown, just one, and I was done. Finished. The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. I adjusted the rearview mirror, my reflection staring back, a man in his late 40s, lines etched around eyes that had seen too many sunrises from behind a windshield, a quiet sorrow a permanent resident in their depths. I was emotionally guarded, a fortress built around a grief I'd buried so deep I sometimes forgot its exact contours, only feeling its pervasive, chilling presence. The city outside my window was a blur of neon and shadow, a sprawling beast that never truly slept, and neither, it seemed, did I. My world was this car, these streets, and the constant, low hum of a life lived on the fringes, always just one fare away from disaster. The early hours of the shift were a blur of unremarkable faces and predictable destinations. A couple arguing loudly after a bar, a young professional tapping impatiently on his phone, a group of college students singing off-key. Each interaction was fleeting, transactional. I was a ghost in their lives, and they, in turn, were fleeting shadows in mine. The rain began to fall around 2 a.m., a soft, persistent drumming on the roof of the car that quickly intensified into a steady downpour. The city lights blurred into streaks, and the wipers worked overtime, a rhythmic swish-swish against the gloom. My eyes, heavy with fatigue, strained against the glare of oncoming headlights. I was ready to call it a night, my body screaming for rest, my mind numb from the endless miles. Just one more fare, I told myself, checking the app. One last push. Then, the ping. A last-minute ride request. My thumb, almost on autopilot, accepted it. The pickup location was a quiet, residential street, a little off my usual route, but not too far. I navigated the slick roads, the tires hissing against the wet asphalt, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. The address was an old Victorian house, set back from the road, its porch light a weak, yellow glow against the dark, rain-soaked night. I pulled up to the curb, the engine idling, and waited. A figure emerged from the shadows of the porch. It was a young woman, looked to be in her early 20s, perhaps a student, or someone who worked late. She was dressed simply, in a long, dark coat that seemed a little out of place for the mild weather, and a scarf wrapped high around her neck, obscuring part of her face. Her clothes had a slightly old-fashioned cut to them, not quite vintage, but certainly not what most people wore these days. She moved with an unnerving quietness, almost floating down the steps, her footsteps barely audible over the drumming rain. Her presence, even before she opened the door, felt different from any other fare I'd ever picked up. A strange, almost ethereal quality. She opened the back door and slid in, the movement fluid and silent. There was no cheerful greeting, no fumbling with a seatbelt, just a profound stillness. The air in the car, already cool from the rain, seemed to drop several degrees the moment she settled in. I shivered, blaming the old car's faulty insulation. "Evening," I managed, my voice sounding rougher than usual in the sudden quiet. "Where are we headed tonight?" Her voice was a soft whisper, barely audible above the rain. "A quiet street," she murmured. "On the outskirts of town. Elmwood Avenue." Elmwood Avenue. The name hit me like a physical blow, a cold dread coiling in my gut. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I knew Elmwood Avenue. Knew it too well. It was a place I had meticulously avoided for years, a street etched into a dark corner of my memory. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was just a coincidence. There were hundreds of Elmwood Avenues in the city, probably. But the way she said it, the quiet certainty in her voice, made my stomach clench. I pulled away from the curb, the wipers swishing furiously, trying to clear the blurring streaks of light. The temperature in the car continued to plummet, a deep, pervasive cold that seeped into my bones, despite the heater being on full blast. My breath plumed faintly in the air. This wasn't just the old car, this was something else. I glanced at the rearview mirror, trying to catch her eye, but she was looking out the window, her profile indistinct in the gloom. Then, the radio. It had been playing some generic pop station, a low, comforting background hum. Suddenly, it flickered. Static burst through the speakers, sharp and jarring, then faded, replaced by snippets of old, melancholic tunes. Not songs I recognized from the charts, but older melodies, haunting and strangely familiar. One particular tune, a slow, mournful piano piece, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I vaguely recalled hearing it before, perhaps on the radio during a long drive, a lifetime ago. I tried to change the station, but the dial seemed stuck, the ghostly melodies continuing to drift in and out of the static. I kept catching glimpses of her in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the dim light filtering from the streetlights. Her eyes seemed too large, too dark, and strangely empty. But then, as I focused, there was something else. A faint echo. A familiarity that tugged at the edges of my consciousness, a recognition I couldn't quite place. It was like looking at a photograph that had faded over time, the details blurred, but the essence still there. I dismissed it as exhaustion, the lingering trauma playing tricks on my mind. My mind was tired, my eyes were tired, everything was tired. It had to be that. An inexplicable sense of profound sadness, rather than fear, began to settle over me. It grew heavier with each mile, a suffocating blanket. I felt a strange, aching pull towards her, a feeling I associated with the phantom weight of my guilt, a burden I carried every waking moment. It was a heavy, suffocating feeling, like a lead weight in my chest. I tried to make small talk again, anything to break the oppressive silence, to shake off the growing unease. "Long night, huh?" I offered, trying to sound casual. Her response was another soft, almost inaudible whisper, "Some nights are longer than others." Her voice was like the rustling of dry leaves, or the distant echo in a forgotten hall. It stirred up all those anxieties about the accident, about her, the young woman whose face I could only dimly recall from the chaos. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was more than just a strange passenger. This was something else entirely. Something I couldn't name, but that felt deeply, intrinsically connected to the deepest, most painful parts of my past. The air grew heavier, thick with unspoken things, and I just kept driving, following the directions to a destination I dreaded, yet felt compelled to reach. The journey felt endless. Each turn of the wheel, each passing street lamp, seemed to deepen the sense of unreality. The city gradually thinned out, the bright lights giving way to darker, residential areas, then to the quiet, almost desolate outskirts. The rain continued, a relentless, mournful accompaniment. My eyes, burning from strain and lack of sleep, darted to the rearview mirror every few seconds, trying to make sense of the passenger. Her stillness was unnerving. She didn't fidget, didn't check her phone, didn't even seem to breathe. She was simply there, a silent, pale presence in my back seat. The familiarity, that nagging sense of having seen her before, grew stronger. It wasn't just a vague resemblance, it was something deeper, a resonance that vibrated in the very core of my being. It was the way her hair fell, the slight tilt of her head, the delicate curve of her jawline. Details I shouldn't know, details that my mind had tried to erase for years. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the eerie silence. This wasn't just déjà vu, this was something else. Something impossible. The old melancholic tunes on the radio became more distinct, clearer, as if the static was retreating. They were sad, haunting melodies, the kind that spoke of loss and longing. One particular song, a lullaby I vaguely remembered from my own childhood, played for a few moments, clear as a bell, before fading back into the ghostly static. It was a song my mother used to sing, a song that brought a fresh wave of that inexplicable sadness, a deep, aching sorrow that had nothing to do with my current financial woes. It felt like a memory I couldn't quite grasp, a dream just out of reach. We finally turned onto Elmwood Avenue. It was darker here, the streetlights spaced further apart, their halos weak against the persistent rain. The houses were older, many of them dark, their windows like vacant eyes. The air grew even colder, a biting chill that made my teeth chatter. I could see my breath clearly now, a wispy cloud in the car's interior. My hands were numb, my fingers stiff. "Just up here," she whispered, her voice a little stronger now, yet still ethereal. The old lamppost. My stomach dropped again, this time with a sickening lurch. The old lamppost. I knew exactly which one she meant. It stood at a quiet, unassuming street corner, just a few blocks ahead. It was the very intersection where it had happened. The place I had avoided for years, the place that haunted my nightmares. My breath hitched in my throat. This couldn't be. It couldn't. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A cruel prank? A strange coincidence? But the cold, the radio, her unnerving stillness, the overwhelming sense of familiarity, it was all too much. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car steady. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, my gaze fixed on the approaching lamppost, a beacon of dread in the rain-swept night. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to drive away, to escape this impossible encounter. But I couldn't. I was frozen, compelled to continue, drawn by an invisible, irresistible force. The air in the car was thick with anticipation, a heavy silence broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain and the frantic beat of my own heart. This was it. The culmination of everything. The moment of truth. I pulled the car to a stop at the curb, directly beneath the old lamppost. Its weak light cast a sickly yellow glow on the wet asphalt, illuminating the swirling rain. The engine idled, a low, nervous tremor. The silence in the car was deafening, the only sound the gentle tick of the cooling engine and the soft hiss of the tires on the wet road. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. The end of the ride. I turned to tell her we'd arrived, my voice catching in my throat. As I did, the interior light of the car flickered, a momentary surge that briefly illuminated the back seat with startling clarity. And in that sudden, brief illumination, my breath caught. My heart seized in my chest, a violent, painful clench that stole the air from my lungs. I didn't see a gaunt stranger. I saw her. The young woman from the accident. Unmistakably her. Not a hazy memory, not a trick of the light, but her face, clear as day. Her eyes, which had seemed hollow before, now held a profound, understanding, and sorrowful gaze. They weren't empty, they were full of a quiet wisdom, a gentle sorrow that mirrored my own. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a dizzying rush of recognition, of memory, of unspeakable grief. It was her. The passenger. The victim. The ghost of my past. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she extended a small, translucent hand towards me. It was pale, almost shimmering, and as it moved, it seemed to disturb the air around it, creating a faint, rippling distortion. She placed a small, worn silver locket into my trembling palm. It was cold, impossibly cold, and yet it pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. My fingers closed around it, the metal rough against my skin. It was the item. The locket. I remembered seeing it at the accident scene, lying on the wet asphalt, glinting under the flashing emergency lights. Or perhaps I'd learned it was hers, a cherished possession that had been lost. Now, it was here, in my hand. Her lips moved, and a soft, clear whisper filled the car, not just in my ears, but in my very soul. It wasn't your fault, Elias. I'm okay. You can let go. Thank you. Her voice, no longer ethereal or distant, was gentle, filled with a compassion that broke through the years of my self-imposed torment. Her words were a balm, a powerful, healing force that began to unravel the tight, painful knot of guilt that had resided in my chest for so long. It wasn't my fault. She was okay. I could let go. Then, slowly, gracefully, she began to fade. Like mist dissolving into the night air, her form became more translucent, her features less distinct. The light around her seemed to dim, pulling her back into the shadows from which she had emerged. The chilling chill intensified, but it wasn't the cold of fear anymore. It was the profound, aching cold of grief, a final, bittersweet farewell that brought with it an unexpected, overwhelming sense of peace and absolution. In moments, she was gone, leaving only the scent of rain, the hum of my engine, and the impossible weight of the locket in my hand. I was left alone in the silent car, trembling uncontrollably. The locket was clutched so tightly in my hand it dug into my skin, its coldness a stark reminder of what had just transpired. The car's interior slowly began to warm, the oppressive chill receding, the radio stabilizing to a normal broadcast, playing a generic pop song that sounded jarringly mundane after the ghostly melodies. My mind reeled, trying to process it all. Was I dreaming? Had I finally lost my mind from exhaustion and grief? But the locket, cold and real in my hand, told me otherwise. I drove aimlessly through the rest of the night, the city lights blurring through the tears streaming down my face. The full, crushing weight of the realization washed over me. It wasn't just a ghost, it was her. And she had come to tell me it wasn't my fault. I pulled over onto a deserted side street, the rain still falling, and leaned my head on the steering wheel, clutching that locket. Memories flooded back, not just vague recollections, but vivid, painful flashes of the day of the accident. The screech of tires, the shattering glass, the sickening crunch of metal, the screams, the flashing lights, the paramedics, and then, the silence. The specific details of that locket, how the police had found it, how it had been returned to her family. Her face, pale and still, forever etched in my mind. But this time, her words, "It wasn't your fault," echoed in my mind, a powerful, insistent refrain, finally releasing the burden of blame I'd carried for so long. All that long-suppressed grief, the trauma from the accident, the sorrow and guilt I'd buried so deeply, it all just overwhelmed me. I sobbed, truly sobbed, the kind of guttural, soul-wrenching sobs that come from years of holding it all in. The tears flowed freely, washing away years of pain. But through the tears, there was this strange, fragile sense of peace and connection I hadn't felt in years. A profound relief from the guilt that had plagued me, a liberation I never thought possible. She had come back, not to haunt me, but to free me. I returned home as dawn broke, the sky a bruised purple and gray. Exhausted, yes, but profoundly changed. The experience hadn't erased the memory of the tragedy, that would always be a part of me. But it had transformed my relationship with it. The crushing weight of that undeserved guilt had lifted. It was replaced by a poignant acceptance and the peace of knowing I was forgiven, not by some abstract force, but by the very person I had carried the guilt for. I placed that worn locket on my bedside table, next to a small, framed photo of a sunset over the ocean, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting, a symbol of peace. I understood now that the phantom wasn't a haunting. It was a loving, forgiving visit. A final gift of peace and absolution. I still drive, of course. The bills haven't disappeared, and the old sedan still groans. But I drive with a different perspective. I no longer feel alone with my guilt. Her presence isn't a haunting memory anymore, it's a comforting, enduring symbol of forgiveness. The story ends with a sense of poignant hope, acceptance, and the quiet strength I found in finally being truly absolved, finally free from the shadow of that accident. The nights are still long, but now, they don't feel quite so bleak. And sometimes, when the radio flickers, I almost expect to hear that haunting, melancholic tune, and I smile, a fragile, bittersweet smile, knowing she's out there, and I'm finally, truly, okay.